Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vicini. We are presented by The Athletic. Today on the show, it is another episode with good friend of the program, Coach Spins. Adam Spinella is in the building. What's going on, man? How you doing?
Hey, Sam. Good to see you. Always good to be here talking hoops. Life is good. Tomorrow, as we're recording this right now on a Sunday night, my time here in the East Coast, tomorrow's the first full day back to work for me. So this is one of those melancholy nights where it's like, man, I wish it could last forever so I don't have to get up and go to work tomorrow. But you know what? No better way to be spending the last night than here talking Western Conference hoops.
Yeah, so we're going to do the second half of our episode that we did last week. We're going to talk about the best cores in the Western Conference. I am excited to do this. I think the first one was super fun. We had a great time just running through all these teams, right? Running through all of these different young players throughout the league. And while the Western Conference is, kind of a question mark in terms of what teams are going to be good coming into this year, right? We have the Clippers that have Kawhi Leonard coming back. We have the Nuggets that have Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray coming back. I think it's just going to be an absolute mess of a race to try and fight to get out of that play-in tournament to get into the regular playoffs. It's also that the Western Conference, I think, has an incredibly fun group of teams, either at the top of the league or kind of in that middle to bottom tier. The Pelicans are in like a weird spot where they're clearly in the middle, but the bottom tier also is a really fun group of teams like the Thunder and the Rockets that are building through the draft and have these really exciting young players. And I'm just excited to be able to talk through this because I think this one's going to be even longer than the last one, just because there are so many like exciting teams to talk about here.
Yeah, exciting teams and exciting young players. I think if there's one trend that I've noticed with the Western Conference the last several years, it's that their teams usually stay good in comparison to the East because they draft so effectively. So when we're having a podcast talking about young cores, the Western Conference is just going to be a little bit more depth to it because teams do really well and they nail their draft picks.
Yeah, they really do. Okay, so let's get started. Let's just dive in because 2.5 minutes in, we need to get moving here because this is going to take a while. The team I wanted to start with is the one that is actually competitive right now, not just having young players and having a lot of really interesting young pieces, but those young pieces are the ones that are actually like carrying the load for them. And it's the Memphis Grizzlies, right? This is, for a lot of people around the league, one of the model organizations right now in terms of rebuilding through the draft. And look, I'm sure that even they would tell you like the reason that they are so able to rebuild on the fly in the way that they have is because they nailed the Ja Morant pick, right? Nailing that top end draft pick where you get an all NBA guy by the time year 2, year 3 rolls around, it makes rebuilding so much easier. But even beyond that, they are a model organization for nailing draft picks, thinking a little bit outside the box, which we'll talk about whenever we get to the picks that they made this year in the draft. But just a really, really good, smart front office that thinks about things a little bit differently and has been extremely successful so far. I don't know if they've nailed every single move they've made, but you don't have to whenever you hit the big ones. And then you also like hit home runs on a couple of the moves on the margins, like they have with the trade up to get Desmond Bane at number 30 and him turning into a guy that I think like even has more upside than what we've seen so far.
I think of the word synergy when I think of the Memphis Grizzlies, just from top to bottom, their organization. If they're going to be the model for a rebuild over the last several years, it's not just because they've nailed high-end talent. It's because they identify sleepers. They find guys that they can develop and really add something to with their skill development program, where guys take a leap from year 1 in the league to years 2 and 3 and even beyond. And they just, the way that they draft, the way that they identify talent, it all supports the style of play that their organization really wants to go with, that Taylor Jenkins has had here with a 5-out offense with some aggressive defensive stuff and length on the front line to be able to have a guy like Jaren Jackson Jr., who's that linchpin defensively and is so impactful, to Ja Morant on offense and realizing what does he need to be successful, surrounding him with good role-playing shooters, slashers, defenders, guys who know their role. like top to bottom, every piece fits so well together. That's why the Grizzlies have turned this around so quickly, but they've got really good players. And it's, to me, those are the guys that deserve a lot of the credit, right? We can talk about the organization and how strong of a job they've done top to bottom, but it's the players that are ones that are out there really doing the work and putting that in. And that's where I'm excited to dive into the Grizzlies here today.
Yeah. And, we should also define what we're talking about here in terms of young players, et cetera, how we're bringing them in and how this can be a bit funky because the Grizzlies are kind of a prime example of this, right? It's mostly rookie scale guys, right? Like that's what we're talking about here is guys on rookie scale deals that have been drafted within the last 4 draft classes is kind of the way you're thinking about this, right?
Right.
That's where it gets a bit funky because like Jaren Jackson is a year or not a year. I think he's like a couple of months younger than John Morant, but theoretically doesn't really qualify for this because he was drafted so young and, is now matriculated through his rookie scale deal at this point. But that doesn't make him like not a piece of the young core either. Definitionally, these things can get funky and finicky. And I deal with this when I do the rookie scale rankings. When I do them, I'm trying to like even decide on how to do them, how I want to like go about defining rookie scale, players, if it's worth continuing to do them. Do I just do them on the podcast? I don't know. We'll talk about it at a later date. But nonetheless, I think that it's worth kind of defining that definitionally in terms of how finicky this can be, because the Grizzlies do have an incredible young core, even without Jaren Jackson. I mean, John Morant is an all NBA player at this point. Desmond Bane is absolutely phenomenal. And, I forget, did Desmond average like 18 points a game last year and is obviously one of the best 3-point shooters in the league. I think as he continues to get even more confident and plays off the bounce a little bit more, we're going to see more growth from him. Like it's just one of those things where he's so good at fitting into a scheme that we saw it more last year in the moments where John Morant was out, and we saw it a little bit more in the moments where Jaren Jackson was out and they went on this big run. I mean, I think Desmond Bane even has more upside than what we've seen so far, right, from Desmond. And that's despite the fact that he came into the league as a senior that was drafted, right? And a guy with like short arms and doesn't have all of the traditional, athleticism and, length and things that we look for in terms of upside. But he's just fucking awesome at basketball. Like that's what it comes down to. He averaged 18 points a game last year, shot 44% from 3 on 7 3-point attempts per game. And then you look at the back part of the season where he was just absolutely phenomenal. I mean, you look at his final 28 games, it looks like here. He averaged 19 to 20 points. He shot 45% from the field, 47% from 3, 92% from the line, and averaged 5 rebounds and 3 assists while playing pretty stout defense. Guys like that are just so hard to find. They're just so valuable because he can scale up toward being a secondary ball handler who can create plays, or scale down to being like one of the most effective role players and like number 3, number 4 options in the league. So, I couldn't be more excited about where Desmond Bane's going. John Morant's just an absolute superstar, and I don't know like how to even talk about him without just saying this guy is an absolutely incredible, unbelievable basketball player.
Well, and those two guys fit together so well. Like when I think of Desmond Bane, I think of John Locke from the TV show Lost, right? Like, don't tell me what I can't do. He's just, it doesn't matter how short his arms are. Doesn't matter what his typical profile has been coming into the league. He's just a good basketball player. And to me, what the Grizzlies' common links have in a lot of these guys are high IQ, high feel guys who don't necessarily have a chip on their shoulder, but somebody might see them as either damaged goods or not necessarily the belle of the ball. And to Memphis, it's feel, it's just the ability to make plays happen on both ends of the floor. And they know how to make that fit within their system. I was a huge fan of Zaire Williams, and I think that he's somebody that's primed to potentially take that leap from year 1 to year 2. Maybe not to the same degree that a Desmond Bane did last year, but Zaire, the circumstances around his time at Stanford, playing through that COVID year, not having regular access to a weight room as a really skinny freshman playing in the Pac-12, it's certainly going to impact his play. I thought he had a really, really good rookie season and is going to be primed for a good leap, for his second year here in the league. So those three of Morant, Williams, and Bane give Memphis so much flexibility and different guys in their backcourt to really play with.
Yeah, and the Zaire thing is interesting. So I did that big write-up on the Patrick Beverley, Talen Horton-Tucker deal. And within that, I noted that Talen Horton-Tucker is still 21 years old. And I don't know, did you read that story that I did?
No.
Okay, good, because this gives us a good thing. Do you know how many players in the final 8 teams, so the conference semifinals in both conferences, do you know how many players were 21 or younger and in the rotation for their team that were in the final 8 teams last year?
Off the top of my head, I'd throw a guess out there and say 2, but I don't think I could even name them.
It is 2.
Okay.
It's Tyrese Maxey, who's phenomenal and great, and we talked about him a little bit last week, and Zaire Williams is the other one. And Zaire Williams, the fact that he was able to enter the rotation last year, I think is a pretty big surprise to a lot of people around the league. Certainly, I think that a lot of people thought he would be a project, and instead he was able to come in and just be an effective energy defender that could put the ball on the ground a little bit and at least keep the offense moving and occasionally knock down a shot. I think that his growth process this year is going to be fascinating. And then you look at just some of the other guys on this roster. I mean, Xavier Tillman is an effective, useful player. Brandon Clark is a guy that stepped up in a big way when Jaren Jackson was out last year and has really impactful, efficient offensive play and switchable defensive abilities. He's not quite the defender that he was at Gonzaga, in my opinion, in the NBA, but he is an effective, if not starter, then, 6th or 7th man that is valuable in today's NBA and could turn into a starter. I think if he continues to develop as a shooter a little bit and continues to develop that defensive ability to become what we saw at Gonzaga, as opposed to being just a solid defender, which is what he is in the NBA at this point. This is where I think it's worth kind of talking about their draft this past year, because I think it was everything that encapsulates them in a weird way. And also a draft that I understood because it fits that synergistic model that you talked about, but also is one that I didn't personally love because I didn't have great grades on some of the players that they took. But because they went to the Memphis Grizzlies, and I know that they will have a plan for how to develop these specific players, I like it a little bit more than if the Hornets would have drafted these guys, right? So they draft Jake LaRavia, who I was very high on throughout the year. And, I think that I drove the bus for him to essentially be someone that was in the public sphere in terms of the draft last year. And I love LaRavia. I think he's an interesting player. I think he's going to be really valuable for the Grizzlies. I don't really care about what he did at Summer League because he's just not a Summer League player. You know what I mean? Yeah. Then they draft David Roddy. They essentially trade DeAnthony Melton for David Roddy, which is not something that I loved, but David Roddy is a very effective, college basketball player that really shoots it well, thinks the game well. And he's a marginal inefficiency. I think that's what Memphis does. They find these guys that are marginal inefficiencies. Desmond Bane with short arms, Xavier Tillman without great athleticism, Brandon Clark with short arms, right? Guys that are just really good at basketball and are competitive and are unselfish human beings that are willing to put in work and are willing to improve and are on upward growth trajectories because they continue to improve. And I think David Roddy is in many ways the epitome of that, even though I just am so skeptical that he's going to have a chance to defend at the NBA level. And then they take Kennedy Chandler, a guy that was too short, right? And goes in the second round despite being the SEC tournament MVP. And they take Vince Williams, who is a guy that, when I talked to teams that had him in for workouts, they were like, this guy just doesn't have any game. Like that's kind of what they said. They were just like, doesn't really dribble well. He wasn't really great in like the 3-on-3 setting, but he was really effective at VCU last year, and his tape was awesome. I thought like he is a guy who has learned how to shoot. He has long arms. I worry a little bit about him in terms of foot speed defensively, but you take a guy in the second round, he's a perfect flyer for that. And then like the epitome of all of this is taking Kenny Lofton and signing him immediately after the draft as a guy that has just always been good at basketball, but hasn't really, doesn't look like an NBA player, right? Like doesn't have that traditional frame. And, you know, even if he can come in and just like kill skinny centers like he did in summer league when he played against Chet, like that's worth a back end of the roster spot, right? Again, I'm skeptical defensively on him, but you know, it's just everything that they're about. They take these marginal inefficiency guys that don't necessarily look like NBA players a lot of the time, but you know what? They're just fucking good at basketball, and they're just like, let's go for it, right?
Well, and to bring this back full circle, like the bow that you can tie on the knot for them is that they've got one guy on each end of the floor that can make all the pieces work no matter what. Ja Morant can create offense regardless of the type of lineups that you've tried out there. He can work in transition. He can work in the half court. He can set up shooters for success. He's great with role guys and bigs. And then on the other end, Jaren Jackson Jr., that versatile linchpin piece who can protect the rim, switch out onto the perimeter on defense, play some minutes at the 5, play the 4 when, you know, most of the time. Like that versatility that those two star players bring to the table really sets them up to play so many different types of lineups and type of players where you can explore the margins and find those inefficiencies and just good basketball players.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I totally agree with you. And I am excited to see where the Grizzlies go. The last guy here that I will bring up is Santi Aldama.
Yeah.
I know that Memphis still really likes him and thought he was terrific in the G League last year. And this is a guy that is, you know, played college basketball in your neck of the woods at Loyola. Yep. And was a statistical marvel. I think I had him at like 31 or 32 and was higher than anyone in the public facing sphere on him pre-draft. And Memphis takes him, I think, at 30.
Yep. Last pick of the first round. Yep.
Last pick of the first round. And he was incredibly efficient and effective in the G League last year. And I think that that could end up working out for them as well. Like they I just love I love them. They draft how I would draft is the thing. Like not all the time, but like their overarching strategy is how I would draft. I would probably take a different player than David Roddy. Like I probably would have taken Ty Washington. Right. But like their overarching strategy is synergistic. It makes sense. And it is, I think, more coherent than what other teams, not every other team, but like there are other teams that are good at the draft, but like than what most other teams bring to the table.
Yeah. And Santi looks great too. I do have the good fortune of having him. He came and worked out in our gym once this summer. Really shot looks great. So I think that it's right on to say that there are high hopes for him and another just unique multi-positional toolsy high feel piece that fits right into everything we're talking about here with Memphis.
And let's move on to another team now. So let's talk about the Warriors, because I think that these are two teams that are both very good and are developing their young players in different ways, right? Whereas the Grizzlies are letting these guys learn on the fly and just be hyper competitive, getting them great minutes early on. The Warriors have a loaded roster. They just won the title, obviously. And their group of young guys led by 3 lottery picks, James Wiseman, Moses Moody, and Jonathan Kuminga. And Jordan Poole still fits in this as well, by the way. Within this paradigm of first 4 years in the NBA, after being a first round pick, like they really are letting these guys kind of learn from others ahead of them. Like even Jordan Poole, who has become an incredibly valuable starting player in the NBA on a title team, was probably their 3rd best offensive player. Cause honestly, like he's probably better offensively than what Clay was, certainly better offensively than what Draymond Green was in the playoffs. defensively is another story with Jordan, but like in overall effectiveness, like he's probably their 5th or 6th best player, but like probably a 5th best player. But Jordan got to learn for a couple of years. He got to learn what it takes to be a professional over the course of the first 2 years in the NBA. And they're doing that with Kuminga, Wiseman, and Moody as well. And it's just so interesting to see the two different strategies where the end goal is the same. The goal is to create something sustainable. The goal is to create something where when Steph and Clay and Draymond retire, they have these young guys that can step into the roles and they can continue to try and compete for a title. It's the same with Grizzlies, right? They're trying to build something sustainable where they have 8 years of Ja and 8 years of Jaren Jackson, 8 years of Desmond Bane, and hopefully more beyond that after they hit unrestricted free agency and would be willing to resign. But then, they draft Kennedy Chandler, who hopefully can take over for Tyus Jones in 2 years, and then hopefully can become an effective player with Ja Morant. And then, they take Jake LaRavia and David Roddy, who hopefully can step into a role left by Kyle Anderson, who left in free agency this summer. So they're trying to achieve the same goal, but they're doing it in such different ways that I find to be incredibly interesting.
The thing with Golden State that has been pretty apparent to me throughout this process is I just try to wrestle with whether some of these young guys have much more trade value than actual value to a Warriors type of team, where the intrigue of a Wiseman, a Kuminga, with the flashes that they're able to show might be what keeps the title window open an extra 2 or 3 years by acquiring the right role players or the right, extra star to come in there and help the team eventually, as opposed to, is this really about development where Steph, Clay, and Draymond now are passing the torch to some of these younger guys that are on the roster? And I'm not saying that both can't be what the Warriors are hoping for. I think that as they play out this situation and develop each guy individually, they'll get a better feel for, who they really think can take that torch and carry the Warriors franchise into the future. But I don't know where you stand on that right now, Sam. I think they're just a super fascinating team because in the back of my mind, all I think about is, as good as these young guys can be, their maximum trade value is really what could drive the Warriors to a different spot the next year or two.
I thought mid last year that they should maybe explore moving like James Wiseman or moving one or two of these young guys for a great vet, because I thought that, like, if you could get like a Miles Turner or someone, like, I thought that'd be really valuable for them, but then they figured it out with Kevon Looney, right? I think I'd keep them. I think that's where I'm at. Like, I think that as long as you still feel confident, look, Jordan Poole is a different conversation because Jordan Poole is about to get wildly expensive for a roster that is already wildly expensive. And they're going to have to make a real cost benefit analysis decision there, where that would be the most expensive, like, basketball team ever, I would imagine, if they end up having to re-signing Jordan Poole to the extension that Jordan Poole is going to get. I don't know, like, but if you're Jordan Poole, like, do you see a circumstance where it's valuable just to stick around Golden State and try to be the guy that, like, takes the reins from Steph, and, like, you continue to learn in this great incubation system? Like, look, I don't know what's most valuable for Jordan Poole. He'd probably have to take a bit of a pay cut, and I don't really advocate players taking pay cuts at the end of the day, because you only get one career. Right. And you only get 10 years of earning value in the case of Poole, sometimes 3 or 4 years, depending on the player at hand and the risk of injury. Right. But with Wiseman, Moody, and Kuminga, I guess what I would say is, for as long as I felt confidence that they're growing in the right direction, and in many cases, like, this is something that the Warriors are going to have much better internal feelings on than, like, I will, right? Because we just didn't see a lot of these guys this past year, other than Kuminga, who played, like, a decent amount, especially late. As long as I felt good internally about the way that they're developing, I would keep them. The moment that shifted, I would move them while they still have value.
Right.
I guess is what I would say.
It's awesome for the Warriors that they can negotiate from such a spot of power in that regard, because no one else will know if they're out on somebody until they've already made that deal. Right. So
as long as they're quiet about it. Yeah.
Right. So I think the organization, by having those 2 down years where they weren't a championship contender, maximizing the young assets, hanging on to them, saying, you know what, not yet. Let's keep these in our back pocket. Let's develop these guys. They're sitting in a great situation where they don't need any of them in order to win another title. They just proved that a couple months ago. But to have these guys to develop, to use as assets is really important. And, I also think it allows them to, in their later picks, later parts of the first round or in the second round, take swings on high upside guys and really just continue to try to swing for the fences around the margins. That's what Patrick Baldwin Jr. is. I think that there's a good chance that, Ryan Rollins is a Jordan Poole insurance card. And there's something really intriguing about a guy like Rollins. So, I mean, they're organizationally making all the right decisions, but it comes from the fact that they're just so stacked with their top 6 or 7 guys that they can afford to do it.
Well, here's the other thing. The Warriors for quite a few years, it felt like, got maligned for their success in the draft, right? Or lack of success in the draft. Here's the thing. It's hard to say anything other than they nailed the Kevon Looney pick. He was just incredibly valuable for them in the playoffs. As one of is really the big for that team. Was an incredible rebounder, did his job. He's a phenomenal pick for them at number 30. Jordan Poole is an incredible pick for them late in the first round. I'd even argue that Eric Paschall is a plus value for what you would expect from taking a guy at 42 overall or wherever they took Eric Paschall. Yeah. I know that they missed on Jacob Evans. I know that they missed on Damian Jones, guys like that. But the hit rate late in the draft is not good. And they nailed 2 starters in Looney and Poole out of, 6 picks or whatever they had in that range. It's hard to say anything other than they've been incredibly successful in the draft at this point.
Yeah, and I think that there might have been, even with guys like Festus Ezeli or Damian Jones, this drafting for need as opposed to drafting for best guy and the right fit for what we're looking for. Because I think at those times they needed another bigger body, and that was something that they were looking to plug that hole with. And toss those 2 guys out of the equation. I agree. They're incredibly good at finding and identifying late talent. I mean, even a guy like Juan Toscano Anderson, who they plucked in their G League system, that's a hell of a find for their front office.
Yeah, I agree with that. Totally. The Warriors, should we talk about where we are on James Wiseman at all? That just seems like a strange situation. I wish the best for him. The first quarter that he played of Summer League was very effective and I liked it. I don't know that I would say much of anything else with him, though, at this point, just in terms of, because I don't know where he is. I liked him pre-draft. He is someone that's really smart. And I think that being around the Warriors system probably has helped him be a lot more competitive and willing to fight for it a little bit. But the body just might not be there. Maybe it might. I don't know. I don't know what to do with James Wiseman, I guess is what I would say. And he's a fascinating piece long-term for them, because if he is what they thought he could be, drafting him at number 2, or even just a little bit lesser than that, because I think I thought he was a little bit lesser than that, even though I ranked him in the top 3 of that class. He does kind of change their trajectory a little bit in a really interesting way.
Yeah, he adds a different dynamic to their offense. I think the one thing they've not had, and probably by design, is a great screen and roll big man. Somebody that can just touch and go, get lobs, and get. It's not saying that they're going to reinvent the wheel just because James Wiseman's in the rotation and play through a ton of pick and roll. But having somebody that can go do some of that is a good dynamic to be able to add, if that's the only value that he brings to the table early on.
Well, it adds something different too, because I would argue Draymond Green is one of the best pick and roll bigs in the NBA.
Sure,
right?
but he's not
so
a lob
versatile.
threat. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a different skill set, right? Like you could run like Draymond Wiseman pick and rolls, right? Like you could run, obviously, like the Steph Dre pick and roll has been one of the most effective things in the NBA for many years at this point. But like you could run a Steph Dre pick and roll, and then you have James Wiseman in the dunker spot where, you know, the man has to come forward to Dre and he throws that lob to Wiseman and it's just curtains, right? So like he gives them a totally different kind of skill set that I think is really, really valuable. I still really love Moses Moody. I still really, really love Jonathan Kuminga. I think that they're both going to be awesome. Moody, I think, is going to be a really effective, 15 to 18 point per game scorer. Jonathan Kuminga, I think, has a very high ceiling if he ever learns to shoot. The athleticism just immediately translated to the NBA. I don't really think anyone would argue otherwise. So fascinating group of young players. And we'll see what they do with Poole, but this is a great team and they are really, I think, building something that is genuinely sustainable.
Yeah, well, it's crazy, Sam. I mean, we spent, the first half hour here talking about two teams when we were doing an episode on young cores. They're the two best teams in the Western Conference last year. One team just won the NBA Finals. To be able to do that.
Other than Phoenix. Yeah, those three.
Yeah, like it's insane to be able to do that when talking about young cores.
Yeah, it really is. Okay, let's do the last team that is like actually really, really good and has, a group of young players, and it's the Pelicans. Like the Pelicans are a fascinating team because they're already really good. Like they were really good last year because of the leap that Brandon Ingram took, because of, acquiring CJ McCollum and Jonas Valanciunas, and obviously the way that the young guys stepped up, especially late in the year. The dude here is Zion Williamson. And if Zion Williamson does what he did in his second season with the team that's now surrounding him, this has a chance to be a top 4 team in the West. If Zion Williamson plays 70 games, 65 games, whatever, and is in reasonable shape, he now has signed a contract that says he has to be in like pretty good shape. Otherwise the guarantees on that deal go down. If he is that, and you're doing CJ McCollum, Zion Williamson, Brandon Ingram, Jonas Valanciunas, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, like Devontae Graham is like a definite rotation player. Like they're a loaded team. I feel like I'm forgetting guys. They have so many dudes. Obviously, Dyson Daniels, they just drafted. Like this team is loaded, just absolutely stacked with talent, and they have the dude in Zion Williamson that could be the one that you build around. If he is what we think he is, and what he at least was when he was a second-year player and averaged 27 points and 8 rebounds and was like the greatest driver of offense at the rim that we've seen in like many years in the NBA, basically since like Shaq, if I remember some of the research that Seth Partnow did. This team has such a high ceiling, and I'm so excited to watch them.
Yeah, and that's where I think your intro about the Western Conference having so many different groups and teams that can get up to that point is really prudent, because the Pelicans stand atop that list to me, and it's all about internal development and health. There was that trend going around. I'm not sure if you saw it, Sam, on social media last week, asking people to see what their wives would say if they could name some NBA players that who would be the first ones that come to mind. And my wife said, the Wonder Man from Duke that plays from New Orleans, one of my favorite players. He's like the freaking Hulk and a gazelle all in one. And that's
amazing.
That's Zion. And we take it for granted because we spent so much of the last year talking about his health, his weight, his contract situation in New Orleans. This is an incredibly special young basketball player. And to be able to add a superstar back into the mix from a team that overachieved, was on pace for about 50 wins over the final 3 or 4 months of the year, has a really shrewd young coach in Willie Green, and a ton of scorers and a ton of wing defenders on their roster. Like, this is a team built for postseason success. And if we get 90% of the Zion that we saw before his injury, they're going to be a real problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, like Zion has his issues. He has to defend. Like he has to, I think, get in better shape so that he can play on defense.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing with him defensively is like he utilizes a lot of his energy on offense and takes plays off defensively. Like he needs to get in better condition. Like it's fine. Like we can say that.
Yeah.
But the guy over the course of his first 85 games in the NBA averaged 26 points, 7 rebounds, shot 60% from the field. If he's that guy, averaged 3 assists, showed even more upside in terms of playmaking, especially when Stan Van Gundy was there and they were running all sorts of interesting actions with like JJ Redick as the screener, and they could figure out different ways to get him in space, right? And this team has a real chance to be able to get him in space, playing him next to, like, if you want to play a Williamson, Larry Nance lineup where Nance is like spacing to the corner. And then you have like Trey Murphy, who's an elite shooter, CJ McCollum, who's an elite shooter, Devontae Graham, who teams guard out there. X, Y, and Z, right? Like whoever you want to throw in there. This team has such fun upside. It has such a fun ceiling if things break right for them. And I'm still like all in on the Brandon Ingram train as well. I think he's going to be a top 25 player, top 20 player, something like that. If not next year, then the year after. He's an awesome player, awesome player, but he doesn't have the upside that Zion does, because Zion is something that is completely different, that we just haven't really seen before. He's like 6'6" and is the best. Like, I guess like maybe he's Charles Barkley sort of, but like with way more athleticism. I don't know. He's a weird player.
He's the Hulk and a gazelle all in one. And
there it is. I love it.
That's what he is. And like, I keep thinking on the defensive side of the floor, he's not going to have to be exposed to high level players if the Pelicans don't want him to be, because you have Herb Jones, because you have Trey Murphy, guys that are long and can defend multiple types of players in positions. We could see, like, I keep thinking lineup wise, what the Pelicans could trot out there for a closing lineup. They could have McCollum and then go Murphy, Ingram, Herb Jones, and Zion, and not have a true big out on the floor. And just so many different combinations that you can do on both ends with a group like that. And if Dyson Daniels ever turns into a functional point guard that can play those closing minutes, maybe he takes the reins from McCollum eventually. Now everybody is 6'6" or above, really, really skilled. There's, again, so many possibilities.
Or even better, like you play Dyson with McCollum, I think is probably their ultimate goal, like within 2 years, because Dyson's 6'7" and has long arms and is a phenomenal defender already. Right. It's just where he gets to offensively. So it's their ceiling is through the roof. We should talk about their 2021 draft though, because they absolutely drilled it. Herb Jones is the guy that got all the love, and we should talk about Herb first. He was one of, I would say, the 25 best defenders in the NBA last season. Look, I haven't gone through and listed defenders. Like, he's probably somewhere between 10 and 25. I'm throwing out a number, right? But he was one of the best. He was a phenomenal defender, multi-positional, can guard 1 through 4 very easily, incredibly disruptive with his length. And he's a genius. Like, this is a guy that I profiled pre-draft, and like, just as a guy that I thought would be really effective defensively in the NBA because of the way that he thinks through rotationally, just instinctually. He knows where to be. He reads things. He's very anticipatory in terms of knowing where exactly he needs to be. And that showcased itself immediately from day one in the NBA.
Yeah. And Trey Murphy, another guy in there who's continued to expand his game a little bit too on the offensive end of the floor. Like, he was pretty much all catch and shoot coming out of college. He looks a lot more comfortable with the ball in his hands right now. Really simple plays more than creative ones, but just his advancement, I think, has helped them, plucking Jose Alvarado out of the obscurity there as an undrafted guy, like really, really good find for their organization. They ended up having 3 guys that could be rotation players on a playoff team their rookie season. That's huge.
Yeah. Like, I did the redraft of the 2021 draft in, I don't know, April, late March, something like that. And I got like yelled at a little bit, not yelled at, but like, and I understand this is like kind of a polarizing opinion, but like, I think I would still take Trey Murphy over Herb Jones. And that's not an indictment of Herb in any way. I think Herb is phenomenal.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the fact that I think Trey Murphy's upside is like Desmond Bainey if it goes right.
Yeah.
Like maybe he can't dribble quite as well as Desmond, but it'll be different, I guess. But he's 6'9". He's a 42% 3-point shooter. And he is really effective defensively because he can move his feet very well. He's just such a two-way weapon as a role player. Like Herb, I know that Herb shot like okay from 3 last year. Like I think he shot like 35%, but teams just don't guard him out there, right? Like they don't like they want him shooting those shots. And that kind of bogs down the offense a little bit. And Herb's really smart in the way that he moves the ball and he can dribble and like, you know, he figures it out on offense. Like he's not like a negative offensive player, but I wouldn't call him a positive either. I think Trey can be a positive on both ends of the court at a pretty substantial level, to the point where I think he can be like one of the best role players in the NBA, like point blank. I love Trey Murphy. I absolutely love Trey Murphy.
Yeah, and I think that the offense fits a lot smoother next to a guy like Zion, where if Zion's in the lineup next year, the Herb Jones stuff offensively shows itself even a little bit more. You know, he played some, I don't want to call it point guard, but primary handling minutes when he was at Alabama. I think that's where he knows how to function, is attacking poor decision makers and guys who sag off of him. There's still a little bit more to figure out. Okay, if I'm in the corner, I'm on the wings, I'm in an auxiliary role here. How do I punish those defenses that are trying to do that for the betterment of my team?
Yep. No, I think that's right. Jose Alvarado is really fun. You know, obviously Dyson Daniels is really fun. Yeah. Kyra Lewis is a guy that I liked pre-draft enough. He just hasn't gotten a clean run. Still very young, obviously. You know, maybe he'll figure it out. Maybe he'll get healthy and be an effective, maybe backup point guard. Maybe he turns into a starter. He has speed. He has skill. You know, it's just unfortunate that he hasn't gotten the clean run yet to where we know what he can be.
And I'm going to be like Jack on the Titanic, just clinging on to him for all hope. Like he is one guy I'm not ever going to sell stock on. I love watching Kyra Lewis play in transition. I believe in the shot. I want him to get healthy. Don't know if the situation in New Orleans is really the right one for him developmentally long-term, just because there's so many different blockades to minutes and fascinating players in a different play style on their roster already. But I'm clinging on for dear life.
Yeah, and the last guy we should talk about is Jaxson Hayes. Really turned into a guy that like plays his role well. Could be a great fit with Zion Williamson if what we saw last year with some of the flashes is real. Like for instance, like he took 1 3 a game and made it at 35%. Mm-hmm. Obviously, that's a thing that opposing teams were ecstatic to see, was him taking threes. Like they left him wide open a lot of the time. But if he can make that open three, it changes things because he is very athletic. He started a lot of games for them last year in 2 big lineups because his ability to guard fours and protect the rim on the weak side and provide some rebounding ability, just with his athleticism, like he can just crash kind of everywhere and make things happen. He's definitely an NBA player. I was worried about him not being an NBA player after his second year. He's definitely an NBA player. He might be a legit starting caliber NBA player in a couple of years if things break right.
Yeah, really athletic, really, really good guarding both the 4 and the 5, which gives New Orleans just lineup versatility. Like if synergy is the word for the Memphis Grizzlies earlier, lineup versatility has to be it for New Orleans in terms of how they're building their roster. Just so many funky pieces that they can interchange and plug together and still be effective on both ends of the floor.
Yeah. The last team in this little contender core before we move on, this will be a little bit shorter of one, is the Minnesota Timberwolves. They're now just full on competing, right? They are a team trying to make the playoffs, win playoff series because they have Karl Towns, Rudy Gobert, and of course, Kermit Wiltz himself, Anthony Edwards. Anthony Edwards is a guy we have to talk about. He is one of the most fun players in the NBA, one of the highest upside players in the NBA, could turn into a top 5 player in the league at some point. Like, there are a few guys that I think you can genuinely say that about. I don't think I would project that for Anthony Edwards because Giannis, Jokic, Luka Doncic, like all these guys are so great, right? Like all these guys are unbelievable, and it's almost impossible to reach that threshold of being that good in the NBA. If Anthony Edwards' development over the next 2 years goes right, he's one of the guys that could get there. And we started to see it last year in the playoffs that he wants the moment and he wants to be that dude that kills you. And he almost killed Memphis last year. And I am so fascinated to see where the Anthony Edwards experience goes, because he is something special for sure.
Yep. A1 from day one, as he would say. And like every natural tool that he has and brings to the table, he's learning how to tap into it a lot more consistently. A lot of the complaints about him coming out of college were, for as unbelievable as an athlete as he is a little bit too jumper heavy. That he, instead of using the athleticism to open up those step backs and the self-creation jumpers, he flips that on its head. He uses the jump shot way too much and doesn't get to the rim enough. And I think that we're starting to see a lot more balance come with his game. He's a lot smarter on the defensive end than he played at Georgia, which quite frankly was a dumpster fire when he was there on the defensive end of the floor. Like, having Rudy Gobert behind him is going to help him immensely. Having Chris Finch, who is an offensive genius, calling a lot of plays there, it helps him on the offensive end of the floor. I think the Timberwolves are a really, really fun team.
I wonder if we see him end up like in the top 5 in steals per game this year, knowing that he has that backing of Rudy Gobert to just gamble a little bit more and try and create transition opportunities. I wouldn't be surprised to see that. He's a really good but he's a good on-ball defender. I wouldn't say he's like really good or awesome at this point, but like he's effective on the ball. Off the ball, I think that he does have that tendency to like kind of get caught in between where he's like gambling and not really gambling and maybe not like wildly attentive all the time. I wonder if having Rudy back there, he just goes full tilt, like toward gambling a little bit more and creates those transition opportunities, shoots passing lanes, does a little bit more that way. I mean, Anthony Edwards last year in that 6-game playoff series against Memphis averaged 25 points on 46% from the field, 40% from 3, 82% from the line. He was fucking 20 years old doing that. He was 20
and big
20
shots
years
too.
Old and killer shots. Like, it's like, look, you don't want to read too much into like the fact that, he was in a movie this summer and like, honestly, like stole the movie in every single scene that he was on screen. He's just that guy. Like there are so few people that are that comfortable with themselves and are that comfortable like on screen or that comfortable like in that moment. And it's so funny to see him like be that comfortable being the villain in a movie, right? He's 20 years old, and like think about like how old like the actors are that you see play teenagers in movies. Typically like they're 24, 25 a lot of the time because like they have more life experience. They've gone through it. Like it's not all the time, but like a lot of the time actors are a little bit older. Anthony Edwards 20 years old playing like a 20-year-old and was so at home and so at ease. Like that guy should be in movies and that guy should be leading the Timberwolves in the middle of the playoffs. Like he is someone that I genuinely believe like can kind of do anything at this point.
Yeah. He's him. He's definitely him.
Yeah. Just a couple other guys on this roster. Jaden McDaniels looks like a really fun piece. The offense is going to have to come along. The shooting is going to have to come along and be a little bit more effective, but he has some ability to handle the ball and create a shot. He's going to have to make plays as a passer a little bit more. But defensively, he's incredibly impactful. The combination of him and Rudy Gobert will hopefully allow Karl Towns to be mitigated a little bit on the defensive end, playing in between those two because they're very different. Rudy's obviously the best rim protector in the NBA, and McDaniel's just like this 6'10" guy with long arms who flies around and has real quickness and, can guard 2 through 4, right? Just a very impactful player, impactful off the ball as well. Really good player, really good starting quality player that's going to make 9 figures in his NBA career, I think.
Yep. Yeah. I like McDaniels there. I mean, intrigued by some of the guys that they brought in this year. Like I know, shout out Matt Penny with the Josh Minot guy, who everyone seems to be much higher on now after summer league performances. Like, Minnesota's got some interesting pieces. I think for me, it's all going to come down to, can Anthony Edwards turn into that number one option on the offensive end of the floor? And then what type of role players, skill players do they need the next 2, 3, 4 years around him, Towns, and Gobert to really make this thing sing? Because, as good as McDaniels is, I worry a little bit on the offensive end of the floor about how he and Gobert look, playing on the same floor as each other. I think there's enough shooting and floor spacing. They're going to be okay. But it might be one of those things just to keep in the back of your mind of, is there somebody else that might be a better fit here? Like, for all of the postseason issues the Utah Jazz had over the last several years, they had a winning formula of, get shooters and really good offensive players and have Rudy Gobert back there to clean things up. You wonder what it could look like weaponized on the defensive end with somebody like McDaniels, who, is a really good wing defender. But you also know that the formula works. And if you can just go back to it with some better players, with, a couple other guys that might be more polished on both ends of the floor, as opposed to Utah, which is really heavily on the offensive end and not as much on D in spots 1 through 4. The Timberwolves have different directions that they can go here.
Yeah, totally. The Wendell Moore pick was interesting. He, hopefully, as long as he shoots, is a great fit within this core, but another guy potentially that may have some shooting questions. I know he hit a high percentage last year, but was not a volume shooter. And I think a lot of times teams were a little bit more comfortable to leave him open off the catch than to close out on him hard, right? Like they were trying to stop him from getting to the rim, stop him from getting to the paint, being able to make dribble pass plays, being able to finish at the rim with his length. I think that, how he develops as a shooter, and he could become a good shooter in time, but how he develops as a shooter is going to be very critical for his play in the NBA. I'm also still a Jalen Noel guy. I think he's going to be an impactful scorer on some level. Naz Reid has been like a solid, okay backup center at this point. We'll see, man. This is a fun group at the very least, and one of the most intriguing teams to watch in the NBA next year because of the Gobert Towns experiment that they've decided to undertake. Okay, let's take a commercial break, and then we're going to get into the rebuilding teams because, of course, the Western Conference has a loaded group of fun rebuilding teams. Okay, we're back, and we're going to talk about the rebuilding teams in the Western Conference. Do you want to start with the sadness that is Oklahoma City?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I guess we have
Bummer.
to, right?
Yeah. It's a bummer. It sucks. Chet Holmgren, we talked about it on the last episode with Alex Schiffer, but Chet Holmgren is going to miss the rest of the year, or the entirety of this year, I guess, with a Liz Frank injury in his right foot. These injuries do, from all, research from folks like Jeff Stotts and people that are way smarter than me in terms of knowing what, the injury history and the results of past people that have had these injuries indicates, most of the time people heal from the Liz Frank injury. It just takes a while to heal because the bone is in the middle of the foot and it doesn't get great blood flow, and it just takes a little bit more time to get there. It's an incredible bummer. It's an incredible accident that this happened. I don't think this, look, I don't think this indicates anything long-term about Chet. Anyone, I mentioned this on the last podcast, but anyone that's saying that like a GM was afraid to draft Chet because he is someone that might get injured while playing in a pro-am on a not great court where the game had to get called midway through it because of court conditions. It's just silly at the end of the day. Right.
Yeah, I mean, so it's an injury that has nothing to do with his frame either, right? Like there's this, if anything, the fact that he doesn't have a ton of weight, mass, whatever you want to call it, it makes it easier on your feet. So I'm so out on trying to make this about Chet and his frame and an I told you so type of moment. Completely random. Injuries happen, pro-ams, overseas with guys that are playing right now, like Gallinari got hurt this weekend. It happens. Just pump the brakes, move on. It sucks for Oklahoma City in year one, but it might put them in better position for a 2023 draft pick. I don't love thinking that way, but I mean, we saw enough flashes from Chet to know that he's going to be special and to know that, look, there have been so many guys that have missed their rookie season and come in and been dominant NBA players before. He's going to be fine, folks. Yep.
Blake Griffin, Joel Embiid. We've seen guys drafted at the top of the draft that have come in and just absolutely dominated. I'm excited to see Chet in year 2, which will be his year 1. I think that it's going to be a really exciting experience. Talking about this Oklahoma City team, though, they have a lot of really fun young guys. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a guy that certainly exists, although at this point he kind of doesn't count within the idea of what we're talking about. I have like a fly buzzing around my head right now as I try and like knock it out of the way. Shai doesn't really count in this, but it feels like he does because he hasn't really been a part of a winning team in Oklahoma City since his second year there. But it's interesting. Like everyone talks about the fact that like, oh, we have no idea how good Shai is because he hasn't played in a winning situation. I mean, here's the thing. Like Shai has played in 13 playoff games already. He's played in 2 playoff runs, both very competitive series, like with the Clippers the first year and then with Oklahoma City in that second year. He was very good in the playoffs in both those series too, by the way. Averaged 14 points as a rookie in that first year. And then in the second year, averaged 16 points playing next to Chris Paul. Like, I'm not worried about Shai at all in the playoffs. I think he is going to be a top 20, 25 player in the NBA at some point. I don't think he's quite there yet, but has a chance to make an all-star team if he takes a leap this year, but has that kind of ceiling. I'm excited for the Shai experience, even if, it doesn't quite count within the idea of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, but we have to bring it up because he is their best player and the guy that they're going to predominantly build around in a lot of different ways. So every draft selection that they have really needs to be made of how does it necessarily fit with Shai? I don't put too much stock into the experience thing because that really is something you only hear the first time you're a playoff team. Once you get over that hump, you make it, then all of a sudden no one's really rattling about that anymore. So I'm not too worried about, listening to any of that or how much damage may or may not be done from the Thunder prolonging a tank for, 3-4 years, however long it takes for them to get good. Get good players. You can surround them with veterans who have been there. They're going to be fine because talent at the end of the day is what wins out, especially talent who's all hitting their stride at the same time. And if there's one thing that the Thunder are really banking on with their, 8,000 draft picks between now and 2030, it's that they're going to have enough assets to be able to reload to get whatever they need down the line, whether that's a veteran to help them or more younger guys or win now pieces that fit the timeline and the trajectory of the core. So if you're Sam Presti, just keep going after talent after talent after talent and try to build an identity. And I know we talked about this on one of our podcasts, earlier this summer. The identity in Oklahoma City is built around length and guys who are really toolsy, but have good wingspans and plus size for their position. Josh Giddey, Chet Holmgren, even a guy like Jalen Williams out of Santa Clara, like just length, guys who can handle a little bit and
it's like size. Intersection of length, size, and skill. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like it's they used to just draft like long athletic guys, and like those guys became good defenders. Andre Robertson, Josh Eustace, they drafted Perry Jones. Like it used to be more on the length athleticism spectrum, but I think now it's like skill intersection with length and length and size, almost like not even as much athleticism. Not to say that like Jalen Williams is a bad athlete or anything, but like, it feels like it's more that like Josh Giddey has incredible positional size and skill level. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has incredible positional size, is like a 6'6" with a 7-foot wingspan, like combo guard. Right. So I think it's like intersection of skill and size and length as much as anything. And Giddey is like the prime example, I think, on like where to start, right? Like what Josh Giddey showed throughout the course of his rookie season is that, look, I don't know if I'm willing to call like a teenager, I think he might've just turned 20, one of the, 10 smartest players in the NBA, but he's going to be that. He might have like, just he's a supercomputer in terms of the way that he thinks through and processes basketball. And those are the kind of guys you want, I think, like just genius level basketball players that have great positional size.
Yeah. And the size is the big deal to me, because whenever you're a talented passer, and Josh has that with both hands, with great pace, great feel, but his ability to throw passes over the top of defenders and not be bothered by lengthy guys that might be on him, that's what's going to enable this Oklahoma City team to really thrive. If you play him at the 1, he's got a huge size advantage. If you want him and Shai to be backcourt partners long term, you need to be willing to, or at least understand that Giddey's going to be guarded by some bigger guys and wings. That doesn't inhibit his vision, his ability to be an effective playmaker. I think that a lot of point guards that we've seen over the last 15 years, if they're a little smaller, you can stick a longer, really good wing defender on them, and it can give them some problems. That doesn't seem to be the case with Giddey, because his game is based on skill and vision and just this funky pace that he plays with, as opposed to quickness, as opposed to, hey, I can just get around anybody. Like it really, really like his game. It's about the fit with SGA long term, and can you surround those guys with spacing?
Yeah, and can Josh learn to shoot? Like Josh can't be a 26% 3-point shooter or whatever. No. Just can't be. Like he needs to be at least a somewhat threatening 3-point shooter at some point, and that's the next frontier of his game, right? Where he's going to have to make the jump. We'll see if he does it. I don't know if he will or not, but if he does, he has real all-star up. Like if he becomes like an actual shooter, he has all-star upside. Yep. If he becomes, less than that, but just like a reasonable spot shooter, he'll be a starter in the NBA for a very long time. That'll be incredibly effective in terms of being able to play real playoff minutes. The draft this year was interesting for them because obviously they draft the 2 Jalen Williamses. They draft Ousmane Dieng. I like Jalen Williams from Santa Clara. I think that's a really good pick for them. Ousmane's interesting to me in terms of his length. I think he's probably a little bit more of a project than Jalen Williams from Santa Clara. Yeah. But again, that intersection of size, skill, and length and everything, he kind of fits that. And what did you think of their draft this year?
I thought it was effective for the areas that we just mentioned. I love Chet, and I really like Santa Clara Jalen Williams. I thought those were 2 fantastic fits for what they're looking for. When I look at Ousmane, I think of, when you have this many draft picks and you're Sam Presti, swing for the fences on a few of them. Now, trading whatever it ended up being 3 first-rounders to try to move up to get Ousmane, maybe a little bit rich for my taste. But at the end of the day, when you've got a swing on Poku, a swing on Ousmane Dieng, like those are the things you should be doing if you're Oklahoma City, because if you do that one more time and just one of those 3 players hits to be a really high-end rotation player or starter on a playoff team, then it's worth all the investment time that they've poured in. So I get it, even though I'm not in love with the player. I certainly understand the type of swing that they're making.
Right. Right. And then last year they end up with Jeremiah Robinson Earl and Trey Mann. And I love Jeremiah Robinson Earl.
Yeah.
Fantastic player. And I didn't love Trey Mann pre-draft. I actually had a better grade on Jeremiah Robinson Earl.
Yep.
But I'll say there were some sneaky fun flashes from Trey Mann last year. Like he had some moments where it was like, oh yeah, like I was worried that he would have no chance at defending. And I think that the Thunder early in the season felt like he had no chance to defend, which is why he didn't play much. But it kind of got better by the end of the year, and the shooting flashes, like the weird pace that he plays at in the pull-up shooting, like all that is pretty real. Look, if he can even be a sixth man, that's probably a win at number 17 or number 19, wherever they took him. And I don't know, man. Like I'm tentatively in on what we saw from Trey Mann late in the year. Like I thought it was pretty good.
Yep. Yeah, totally agree there. I think when you're looking at evaluating guys like Mann, like Giddey, like any of these number of young guys, it's going to be really difficult on the defensive end when Oklahoma City doesn't have a ton of rim protection. I think we saw that catch up to them last year. I worry that with Chet being out, it's harder to know who a really effective defender is going to be in the type of scheme that they want to play when you're missing a guy like Chet Holmgren. So while the injury that he suffered is really devastating for him in his rookie season, it just challenges the evaluation process of a lot of these younger guys. I love Jeremiah Robinson Earl. I think he was a fantastic get, and some of the most underrated parts of building a roster is just going out there and getting really solid, dependable basketball players. I think JRE certainly is that, but he doesn't provide the type of rim protection. He's a small ball five if that's where he's going to be playing. And it's a very different type of defensive scheme and coverage and just mentality that you have when you're on the floor and, you know, Chet Holmgren's behind you as opposed to Jeremiah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. We have to talk about the last guy here. It is someone that is near and dear to my heart. Pokuism is one of the core tenets of the Game Theory podcast. It states that there is between a 0 and 100% chance that Aleksej Pokusevski is going to be an effective NBA player. I enjoy watching Poku. He is inexperienced, definitely. It's clear that there's talent there somewhere. How effectively it all wraps together in a package that makes a reasonably like impactful NBA player, I don't know, but where are you at on Poku? This is an important moment in your game theory, your game theory career here.
Yeah, I love the experience. I love watching. I call him a shot no chaser type of player because that's kind of the mood that I have to be in to really dive in and enjoy watching him sometimes. Yeah. But like it's from a developmental standpoint, it's really hard with these well-rounded toolsy guys to know which one of their skills is going to pop most in the NBA. What develops to be his signature. And that was always a thing for me when evaluating Poku pre-draft, is I saw these flashes of handling, of length, of shooting on the move, pick and pop, creating his own shot, all of these different things that he does okay. What is he going to do really well enough to become a signature guy? And I thought his role in the NBA is always going to be challenged by what develops first. And we're 2 years into this experience, and I still don't really know what the answer to that is. So loving the experience. Glad I bought a ticket to the ride. Don't want to get off yet, but I don't know what the hell it is that we're doing.
I don't either. I love the player. I don't know. He's a fun player. He is. Look, like he's 7 foot tall and he can dribble, and like his lower half is not that weak. Like he has, like, it looks like put on weight through his lower half, which could help him become more functional in the way that his game works. He has no idea where he should be defensively. He makes wild plays offensively that like off the dribble where like you're like, oh, this is a 7-footer pulling up, and wait, this isn't normal. This is cool. But then he shoots like 30% from three half the time, and he can pass, but then he throws like some of the wildest fucking things you'll see on planet Earth. He's like not good at NBA basketball right now. There is a world where by the time he's 24 years old, he is very effective if the shot comes along and the decision making like slows down a little bit. I would continue going down this road for sure, because what else are the Thunder doing right now? Like, why not? The thing that there's nothing good that comes out of the Chet Holmgren injury, but it does open up minutes for Aleksej, and I'm fascinated to see where that goes.
Yeah, I think anytime you're an organization, you've got to resist the urge to just get a new fancier toy and dive into that only. That they've spent the last 3 years accumulating intriguing young players. There's only so many minutes to go around. You've got to find ways to figure out if the long-term development for these guys is really going to pay off. And in order to do that, you got to be able to give them minutes consistently. So that's the one thing here, whether it's this year or next year, that the Thunder are going to have so many young players on their roster. It's really hard to separate amongst each other when you're all fighting for game reps. Like, I think back to a guy like Theo Maledon, who I was pretty high on. He's had a roller coaster of a career thus far, and it's not just due to his own production, but because you see a guy like Trey Mann come in and be really successful right away. You draft Josh Giddey. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is an all-star type of player with the ball in his hands. What does Maledon do to augment that group? How do you develop him in any of those different ways? Just feels like he's been leapfrogged. I think there's still value there. I buy into Maledon in the right system and circumstances. But again, it's kind of the danger of accumulating so many good young players at the same time, which is somebody might end up being a miss just because there's not enough time to hit on everybody.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Okay, let's go to Houston, because Houston is the next weird team here. Jalen Green and Jabari Smith, I think, are the two main guys, but obviously Alperen Şengün, and then they have Kevin Porter, who still qualifies here. Yep. They have, Tari Eason and Usman Garuba and Ty Washington, and then they have Josh Christopher and Dacian Nix and KJ Martin. Like, another team where they probably can't develop all these guys. Yep. I mean, it seems like KJ Martin requested a trade from reports this summer because he kind of sees the writing on the wall that they can't develop all of these guys. It's a fascinating group. I don't like, from a talent perspective, I like Jalen Green a lot. I like Jabari Smith a lot. Şengün is fascinating. I like the combo of Jabari Smith and Şengün. Tari Eason is very like physically imposing and long and has some skill. I like Ty Washington as a player. It's a weird mix. It's a weird mix of players.
Yeah, it's funny when I look at them in groups of twos, I can find ways that they really fit well together, right? Like, I think Porter and Jalen Green are a dynamic backcourt because both can handle and create their own shot and have a lot of confidence. I think Ty Washington fits in well with either of those two guys. I don't know if I love a long-term roster built on all three of them in the backcourt. I look at Jabari and Şengün, like you said, that makes a little bit of sense. Jabari, a really imposing defender who wants to defend, is versatile on the perimeter, helps alleviate some of the rim drives that would put Şengün in trouble as a rim protector. Love those two guys together. But when you throw, Jalen Green, Şengün, and Jabari in a core, it's one guy who I think creates his own shot, and that's Jalen. I don't see that necessarily for Jabari long-term. It's a lot of touches for Şengün at the high post where he's great. Okay, Jabari can space the floor. What are we doing with the rest of the guys, the guards that are so good with the ball in their hands? How do they fit in a more cutting-based system if Şengün ends up really emerging and becoming the guy? Like, the idealized version of every single one of these stars or three guys that I should say four guys with Porter in there, that they've really accumulated over the last few years. invested in. If 2 or 3 of those guys really hit, one of them seems like from a fit perspective, they have to be the odd man out. And that's what's really head scratching about how this team's put together to me.
Well, it's like the difference between them and Memphis. Memphis continues to draft guys that have a real floor that makes sense because they can play with one another. And I don't mean to say that like the Houston guys are selfish in any way, but like Memphis, it seems like has really prioritized these guys that are unselfish, right? Like particularly unselfish in the way that they go about their business. Houston, it's a lot of guys that need the ball in their hand on some level, right? Like Ty needs the ball in his hand to be effective. Kevin Porter needs the ball in his hand to be effective because he's not an impactful shooter. I know what like the spot up numbers say, like he did make his catch and shoot jumpers at a very high level last year. I would like to see that back itself up again this year is what I would say. Because either teams will close out on him harder and he will be effective or not effective, or he'll be effective again because teams aren't closing out on him. Like, I don't know. I don't know what to make of his shooting yet. It's like a lot of his jumpers don't come off the catch at this point because he has the ball in his hands a lot and really likes to have the ball in his hands a lot. That's kind of what he enjoys. That's how he enjoys playing. Right. And then Jalen Green likes to have the ball in his hands a lot. And how much space does that give Jabari Smith to continue to develop with the ball in his hands? Because while we talk about the fact that Jabari Smith isn't like the best ball handler right now, for him to reach his ceiling, he does need the reps as a ball handler to like work through that and continue to make waves. And like part of that's going to be improving in the off season, right? Like this year, next year, it's going to be a process that involves more than just game reps, but like he needs them also. So, and like Tari Eason is a guy that definitely like is most effective with the ball in his hands right now. It's interesting. They have a lot of really talented pieces. And like, this is not even including Şengün yet, who by the way, like really impactful as like a pick and short roll guy or like pick and pop guy who like puts the ball on the deck and then makes a passing read, right? Like, a very talented group of players with the ball in their hands. And you can make a case that in today's NBA, having guys that are threatening with the ball in their hands and can shoot, because in a lot of cases, these guys can shoot, like Jalen Green, Ty Washington, I trust as a shooter. Jabari Smith, obviously a really good shooter. I think Şengün has a chance to shoot. I think Kevin Porter, like based off of what we saw last year when he didn't have when he was spotting up and shooting, it's impossible to say that he doesn't at least have a ceiling as a shooter if it goes right. So there is a world where this could all really work out. I don't know. Like I'm a little bit, and part of this is they're so early in their development that I think they should just be trying to find the guy at the end of the day and finding Jalen Green and making sure he's the guy. And then once Jalen Green established himself, like an averages hopefully like 23 points a game this year, then you build around Jalen Green with players that make sense. I like the idea of Ty Washington next to him, for instance. I think I like the idea of Tari Eason and Jabari Smith next to him. What they do at the center position long-term is interesting because I did not love Şengün's defense last year. I know that Matt Moore did a Twitter thing saying that like statistically Şengün's defense was good. That's using like synergy numbers, and I don't think synergy numbers are. I love synergy. Shout out Matt Curley. Shout out everyone over there. You guys are a great team. I don't love using individual synergy numbers. And while he is good at deflections and things, he's a very reactive player. I think that his lack of foot speed and his decision sometimes to gamble a little bit to get those deflections and his lack of awareness rotationally is not very good. And he was not a good I don't know how you can watch his tape and come away saying he was a good defender last year. maybe he can get there. He's a genius, like IQ guy. Like he sees the game incredibly well. And I think that those guys that are super, super smart maybe tend to be able to figure out at some point and get to a level where that's passable defensively. That's why I'd absolutely like continue to invest real minutes in him. And I think that Steven Silas did not invest enough real minutes in him, especially early in the season last year. I think that maybe he would have been a little bit better by the end of the year if he got some of the minutes earlier in the year, but he's a question mark to me, I guess is what I would say right now, more than like a guaranteed tried and true building block. Like I'm just as interested in him as I am in Tari Eason at this point, I guess is like the way I would put it. And Tari has his own questions. So it's a fascinating core that there are so many questions with this core, I guess is the point.
Yeah. And I think on the defensive end of the floor, like to me, their three best individual defenders are Jabari Smith, Tari Eason, and Usman Garuba. And
we haven't even talked about Usman. Yeah.
And like I have a really hard time envisioning how two of those guys really share the floor in effective minutes on the offensive end of the floor. Like you might be able to get away with it with Tari and Jabari at the 3 and the 4, but it's a team that has a lot of guys that need the ball in their hands, like you said, and the defensive personnel that they have overlaps so much that I feel like they're going to be starving for defensive production at some point.
Yeah. And like on some level, it's weird. Like the centers that they have taken, like I consider Şengün a center.
Yep.
Really, frankly, I consider Garuba like a center because offensively that's what he is.
Yep.
I think they're fascinating in their own ways. Garuba has a chance to be a very impactful defender, but he needs to get to the point where he can play minutes offensively. Yeah. I loved Garuba pre-draft and he was hurt, right? Like we probably shouldn't hold that against him. Right. I don't know. Like the idea of Garuba and Şengün is interesting to me, but then like, that's not Jabari Smith.
Right.
Who needs to play. It's a weird, but like they're so young in their infancy as a group that like, do you care about the way all of this fits? Like they're not winning games yet at this point, and they're not going to win games this year. So like, does it matter the way that they fit? I don't know. Like they've drafted a lot of talented players. I like the fact that they've drafted a lot of talented players, and I like all of these guys singularly. And I like you said, I like some of them like in conjunction with one another. And maybe that's all that matters at this point. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a good problem to have, right? You'd rather have talent and have to figure out how to make it work than be trotting out lineups that you feel can't really win you basketball games. Yeah.
Yeah. And like this team probably isn't going to win basketball games, right? Like, no. I mean, they're not going to be good this year, and that's fine. They're so early at this point that they're not like trying to be good yet. I think that the 2023-24 season is probably the year when they try and make a leap up the Western Conference rankings. But it's hard because I don't want to overstate my concerns. You know what I mean? Like Jalen Green's really good. Jalen Green's closed the year last year was amazing. He was awesome. Yep. Like his last like 35 games of the year was everything that Houston wanted when they drafted him at number 2. And he looks like a future 25 point per game scorer. Like the fact that you have that guy is what matters. The fact that you have Jabari Smith, who I think is going to be an incredibly impactful two-way player, that's what matters. Right.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And again, the rest of the pieces, once you figure out who the 2 or 3 that you're going to build around, everyone else is not necessarily expendable, but you have an understanding that it's all about finding your pillars and then figuring out what you do around that in order to win basketball games. So we're still in the identify pillars phase, which means don't have to worry too much about winning games. Just let the kids go out there, kind of roll the ball out, and all of these guys who are best within their hands, see who really sticks and ends up developing into something. And those are the guys we build around long-term.
Yeah. I will say, I think that it would really benefit them for Jalen Green to average like 23 points per game this year.
Yeah.
And for them to like, no. And frankly, like, I think he is going to do that. Like, I think he's going to be a monster this year. Like from what we saw late in the year last year, I think he's going to be an absolute stud this year. And I think he is going to achieve this. But if he averages 15, 17 points a game again, right? Like something like that this year, it becomes like you're spinning your wheels a little bit. And that can be a tough place to be organizationally, because rookie contracts are 4 years, but those 4 years catch up to you in a hurry, a little bit quicker than what you think. So I would really hope that Jalen Green does what I think he's going to do, and average 20 to 23 points per game, and does it like on 44% from the field and 37, 38% from three and 80 plus from the line. Yeah. And as long as he does that, I think that Houston is right along their trajectory at this point.
Yep. Totally agree. Yep.
Okay. Let's move on to the San Antonio Spurs, which is a newly rebuilding team. Obviously, they have guys like Josh Primo and Devin Vassell. Keldon Johnson still counts in this conversation. And I think Keldon Johnson's one of those guys that's like just gone completely ignored by the national media, despite the fact that he is really good.
He's really good.
Like really good. Yeah. Like averaged as a 21-year-old last season, or 22, I guess he was, but he averaged 17.6 rebounds while shooting 40% from three on 5 3-point attempts per game. He's really good. Like being that young, being able to do that, like the Spurs should think he is a 20-point per game scorer long-term, I think at this point. That's why they signed him to that extension, right? Like that's a extension that I think makes total sense for them to give him. What is it? It's like, I think it's a descending like $77 million a year or something like that. Yeah. It's an awesome contract. And this year they go out and they bring in 3 first-round picks, Jeremy Sohan, who I love, and then Malachi Branham and Blake Wesley, who I had in the 20s, which is where they drafted them. And I think they drafted them like in completely appropriate spots.
Yeah.
And this team is a team that's had good track record developing players. And these are guys that have high upside, certainly, in Branham and Wesley. Neither of them, I think, are particular. Wesley's okay defensively. Wesley was good on ball this year defensively. Yeah. Malachi Branham is not very good defensively at this point. Interesting core. Again, like it's a young group of guys that are going to figure it out together, I guess.
Yeah, they're a step farther back than everybody else that we've talked about thus far, because they're still searching for who's going to be that pillar and that guy. I think there are high hopes that it ends up being Josh Primo. I think there's really high hopes that Keldon Johnson can carry, like you said, a higher scoring load. I don't know if either of those are number one option type of guys that you want to have on a playoff caliber team. Maybe they grow into that. Maybe this is the year where San Antonio just has to invest in saying, you know what, we're going to ride or die by these 2 guys and see what they give us. I love Devin Vassell. I think there's untapped potential for him that he's started to tap into as being a guy who creates his own shot. But again, not a number one option type of guy, if I'm being honest with you. That's just not where I see him. So there's the 3 rookies that you never know what to expect from a rookie coming in, and they're never going to be really efficient. But with the defensive concerns of a guy like Branham, or just the inconsistencies at times of a guy like Blake Wesley, how much are you going to look at this season, a year from now and say, okay, this is the role that guy's going to be able to play long term. We really know what we're getting with Blake Wesley. With Malachi Branham, man, this is the type of player we know we can build around now. I don't know if a year is going to be enough to really do that for San Antonio. So this is a very, very early way of me saying I like a lot of the individual pieces. I think they're still missing their top dog. Yeah,
this is a pure developmental year for San Antonio at this point. Now that they've moved to DeJounte Murray, they have all of these picks. This is like absolutely a developmental year in every way. And we'll see what these guys look like, right? Like Jakob Poeltl is an interesting player that like could be a part of the core, could be moved, right? They have a bunch of other guys, right? Like Doug McDermott, Zach Collins, like interesting players, but like could be moved, could not be there in a year or two, right? I don't know. It's a weird group. It's a very weird group of players that, like, the Spurs, they have a chance to be the worst team in the NBA this year, right?
Mm-hmm. They definitely do. And it's not because they don't have talent. It's because all of the talent that they have is so young.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I like Keldon Johnson, but Keldon Johnson, like, might be their highest scorer this year.
Yeah.
And like Devin Vassell, I like Devin, but like, he might be a year away from being like a winning player in the NBA. And I don't know what they're going to do at lead guard. Do you? Like, are they just going to like give the ball to Josh Primo?
I would think. I mean, what is it? Trey Jones is the other
Trey
guy?
Jones, maybe?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. Like, I like Trey. Like, let's do this. But I had a top 20 grade on Trey. Like, I actually really like Trey, but
yeah, me too.
I haven't, like, he was effective when he played last year. Like, he averaged 6 points, 3 assists in 16 minutes a game while shooting 49% from the field, but like, he can't shoot yet. So,
and even if Trey Jones ends up being a guy that, you know, surprises us and has a really, really good year, what does that mean long term for him and Primo? Is that a guy that, you know, are those two guys you can play alongside each other for really long minutes? It's just, there's a lot of fascinating things the Spurs have to figure out.
Honestly, like, I might like that fit because Trey can really defend at the point of attack and Primo can do some stuff. And then they have Blake, obviously. Like, Blake Wesley played point last year at Notre Dame. Maybe you just kind of give the ball to him. But this has a chance to be the worst team in the NBA this year, I think. And like, I don't feel like many people are talking about it. I saw that Robbie Callan tweeted out earlier the over-under win totals for this year. And God, am I excited to do that show with Robbie this year. But I'm like trying to find, I think it was Jeff Sherman that showed them. Where are they? We've got, that's NHL points. It's NBA regular season wins. San Antonio's over under is 22.5. They actually are the lowest team right now in terms of over under win total. So
I'm taking the under.
Vegas agrees with me.
Yeah,
I think I am too, honestly. This is not going to be a very good team this year. And that's fine. It's all about developing these young guys, and they have Malachi Branham and Blake Wesley. And I will say, I love Jeremy Sohan. I love him. I think he's going to be awesome. He's a great defender, potential offensively because he's so long and can dribble a little bit and knows how to play. Needs to shoot it. They have a lot of guys that need to shoot it. Like, if you listen to people pre-draft that saw Malachi Branham, even he had some problems shooting at pre-draft. Although I think that, you know, he was a 40% shooter at Ohio State last year. I think we should probably assume he's going to shoot. But Trey Jones, like, not a great shooter yet. Devin Vassell's not a high volume shooter yet. Keldon Johnson is a shooter at this point. I think we've established that, but I don't know. This is a weird team.
It is a
weird team.
Well, it gets even weirder when, you know, the one last guy I wanted to bring up here is a Romeo Langford, you know, somebody that they got coming from Boston. Like, that's another experiment, another non-shooting right now, like more of a slashy type of athletic wing that fits in with a lot of the pieces that they have. It's just a ton of overlap at those spots. No primary guy that really sticks out to me yet, and no major shooting. So I'm hoping, for the sake of our dear friend Matt Penny, that Josh Primo averages like 30 a game this year and is just the best player on this team, bar none. But
would love it.
I can't have too high of expectations for him simply because he is so young and we haven't seen a ton of what he can do with the ball in his hands at the NBA level.
The last guy I want to point out is Dom Barlow, who's on a two-way for them. I'm fascinated by that project too. He's like 6'10", incredibly big hands, incredibly long arms, really took a leap last year with the Overtime Elite program. And I think he has a chance to be something, but like another project for sure. Interesting group. Very, very interesting group of players. Let's move on to the Portland Trail Blazers. This is like kind of the last team we wanted to dive into a little bit, but it's not going to be like a crazy big deep dive because look, it's Shaedon Sharpe, who we haven't seen in 2 years, really. It's like guys like Trendon Watford and Greg Brown, and I guess is Giddey still on this roster? And Nasir Little's interesting. Yeah. Jared Rhoden's on this roster. My favorite, I'll be honest, I think their second best prospect is Jabari Walker from Colorado. That's a guy that I just ranked too low. I had him at 47. I had a guaranteed contract grade on him, but I knew it when I watched the tape, and then I watched him at Summer League, and I was like, oh, this guy's good. This guy's really good. Just smart, cutting off the ball, will shoot it. He defends. That's one where I just didn't stick to my guns. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I knew he was better than Pat Baldwin, and I ranked him below Pat Baldwin. You know what I mean? It's one of those ones where you just fuck up. You get into the 40s and
I know it.
You just kind of fuck it up every year. I really like Jabari Walker. I think he's going to be terrific. Just a smart player that knows how to play and defends and is an athlete. It's all there. But I guess the guy is Shaedon, and I don't think you and I have talked a lot about Shaedon, have we?
Yeah, I don't really know much to add to a conversation on Shaedon, just because I haven't seen him very much. What do I have to go off of other than 2 years old AAU film where he looked like the most athletic guy in the gym? It's hard to really say what he's going to look like. I think the most important thing, and to me, it fits what the Blazers are doing right now. Just be patient with him. There needs to be very little expectation for year one for a guy like Shaedon Sharpe to come in and do anything. If he's playing 8 minutes a game in the rotation in the final month or so of the season, and the Blazers are still in contention, I think that's a really good thing for the Blazers, not a bad thing.
Yeah, and the Blazers are in a weird position because the West is as deep as it is. And they theoretically could miss the play-in. You look at, you have teams. So in their own division, they have Denver, Minnesota. They're both ahead of them in the pecking order. I would put the Lakers ahead of them. I would put the Clippers ahead of them. I would put the Warriors and the Suns ahead of them. That's 6. In the Southwest Division, Memphis and New Orleans and Dallas. That's 9 teams. I would have Portland 10th in the pecking order, despite being an enormous Damian Lillard fan. And if the Kings jumped them because their offense is just awesome, or if Utah jumped them because they don't trade Donovan Mitchell or something like that. It's a weird team, and I don't know where they fit at this point. It feels like they're just stuck in the middle for the rest of the time that they have Damian Lillard, unless they just absolutely nail a draft pick like a Shaedon Sharpe or something that could be forthcoming. And I don't know.
Where are you on Keon Johnson, Sam?
So I didn't love the Tennessee tape. I liked a lot of what we saw from him coming into Tennessee, but obviously the quality of competition was not always awesome. Super athlete for sure, but I don't know if he processes the game as quickly as I would like to see from someone like Keon Johnson.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I really like the natural tools that he brings to the table, and saw a lot of ways that he can help a team if developed the right way.
He's what? One of the 10 best athletes in the NBA?
Yeah, easy.
Yeah.
I mean, and in versatile ways too, not just straight lines or above the rim, moving his feet in tight spaces. He guards guys really well. He's long armed. I like the theory of what Keon Johnson can be. I just don't see how he helps this Blazers team right now. Right. And
he'd need to be a defensive stopper. He'd need to invest all of his energy in being that guy. Right.
Yeah, he would need to, which in that case, I think that's where, when you have Jabari Walker, maybe that's what he turns into, where, okay, is Keon
Nasir Little as well?
Nasir Little is absolutely that type of guy. So it's an overlap for some of these younger guys. When you're not necessarily a rebuilding team, but you're in the middle of the pack there, like Portland is, you want to compete your margin for error is very, very, very thin in those role player spots, particularly 6, 7, 8 that you're bringing off the bench. You've got to be able to nail those minutes when Dame is resting. And I don't know if the younger guys really do a ton on the offensive end to help that, which means there's going to be a lot of competition for who ends up being the defensive guy that gets those minutes.
Yeah, that's true. I will say, like, Keon showed some flashes when he got to Portland last year. Like, he started 12 games. He averaged 25 minutes a night, averaged 10 points per game. It's just that he shot like horribly inside the arc. And like, he had like a 20-point game. He had a 19-point game. He had an 18-point game. Like, he had a couple of like, oh, like, this is something games. And that's really all Portland, I think, could have looked for from him last year. He needs to improve off the bounce, needs to improve the way that he can like functionally score in the mid range and at the rim. I don't love his footwork as a below the rim finisher right now, because like not everything is going to be skying above the basket as much as we all love to envision it that way. Just functionally, like, he has all of the ability to do this. He just needs to like improve the details, right? Definitely a project worth investing in is what I would say. Like, absolutely someone that makes sense for them.
Yeah. Again, I like a lot of the younger pieces there from an intrigue standpoint. It's just, this is, Damian Lillard is still here. The rubber has to meet the road now. So who's going to really step up and be able to give them something right away? I think developmental minutes are not really there for the Blazers anymore.
And by the way, like, the guy that's going to step up and be the defensive stopper this year is Gary Payton. Like, obviously, like, he's going to be, I would imagine that like he might start for them this year. And if not, he'll play 28 minutes off the bench because he'll be the defensive stopper. But like, as a guy to learn from, there probably aren't many better guys to learn from in this regard than Gary Payton, just in terms of using your elite athleticism to just bring it every single night on that end. So I'm not wildly in on this Portland young core, but they have a lot of young guys, which is interesting at the very least. Denver, we have listed here: Bones, Christian Brown, Zeke Naji, Peyton Watson, Ishmael Kamagate. Interesting group. Like, fun group.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's Bones. He's the one guy that can really hit out of this group. If he turns, takes another leap, we're talking about this Denver core a little bit differently. I think right now it's just predominantly role players, and that's fine because that's all this team needs. But no more interest from me from a who's going to really hit long term. Like, it's Bones. I hope he gets there. If not, they're fine. If he does, that elevates their team a little bit more.
Would you take Bones or Peyton Watson, or Bones or Christian Brown right now, if you had to pick one?
Bones. Yeah, just because I tend to believe that, if you see somebody that's had 1 year of regular season success, I trust that more than anybody who really hasn't. So I'm going to go with Bones. Yeah.
I think I would take Bones right now. I do like Christian Brown enough to where it's a legitimate conversation for me. Honestly, like, given their depth, it's hard because like the Shaedon Sharpe like thing could turn into like a real upside swing. I think I like this young core better than Portland's, to be honest. Just because Bones is definitely a good NBA player. I think Christian Brown's going to be a good NBA player. Peyton Watson is a good upside swing on some level. Like, he could be a guy that's like really something defensively. He has some shot creation, has some passing point forward abilities. I had a first round grade on Kamagate as well. So I also really like Kamagate. Really smart defender, just doesn't know how to yet, but has the ability to be an effective defender. He's a good rotational weak side defender. He's still learning like footwork and drop coverage and still learning like a lot of the intricacies, but he's really light on his feet. He moves well. And he's 6'11" 6'11" with like a 7'4", 7'3.5" wingspan, something like that. So has a lot of tools. And I really like the fact that, this is a guy that won the defensive player of the year in France last year and was effective despite the fact that he still has a long way to grow positionally, defensively. I mean, teams wise, I don't know. Like, I don't know that I need to talk about the Clippers here. I guess the Jazz would be like semi interesting, if only because they acquired a few of these guys recently, right? Like Talen Horton-Tucker and Leandro Bolmaro and Walker Kessler. Like, all these guys are somewhat interesting. Obviously, Azubuike and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. I don't think any of these guys are certain NBA players, but I think Talen Horton-Tucker's upside is fascinating. Alexander Walker's a bit of disappointment to me. I thought he was going to be better than he is, but he just hasn't quite figured out the moderation of like creating for others and passing compared to just like chucking a lot of the time, it feels like. That's a bit of a disappointment. The Kings have Keegan Murray as well. Just Keegan Murray might be awesome, might be like great at a certain level. It's just he's kind of the only guy on the Kings at this point that I'm wildly interested in that's still on a rookie scale deal. Nimi Keita's fine. Keon Ellis is fine, but
we like Davion too. I mean, Davion more of a known commodity at this point. Yeah,
I'm an idiot. Davion's close to the season was actually awesome. I keep forgetting that Davion is not like in his fourth year in the NBA for some reason. Davion's close to the year last year was awesome. I thought like really, really good. And I would imagine that like it's part of why they traded Tyrese Halliburton. My thoughts on that are clear. I don't love the idea of that, but like Davion was so good late last year, both offensively and as like a pesky point of attack defender defensively, that you at least like understood it. He, in his last 14 games, he averaged 18 points, 8 assists, only 3 turnovers, 46% from the field, 34.5% from 3. Those are like borderline starting point guard numbers when you account for the fact that he's a good defender as well. So if he brings that again this year, let's do it. Like, let's lock in. This is going to be a fun Kings team. But Davion and Keegan Murray, again, like that duo is better than what the Nuggets and Blazers have for sure. Right.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I think the question for a team like Sacramento is always going to be in the back of my head. Like, what would this have looked like with Halliburton too? And it's unfair because, what's done is done, but man, do I wish I could have seen Halliburton and Keegan Murray kind of playing alongside each other. I think that'd be a really fun duo.
Yep. Yeah, that's definitely right. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to talk about Jaden Hardy and the Dallas Mavericks because I know that you want to talk about Jaden Hardy.
I always want to talk about Jaden Hardy. I mean, look, efficiency and summer league don't go hand in hand. So I'm just not too up in arms about what we saw over out there in Las Vegas. Dallas is in a different position because they've proven they're ready to compete. They're going in a direction of just wanting guys who are going to come in right away and help them play. I think Jaden Hardy might need a year just physically, timing wise, to figure out how to continue to get to his spots. That's the one thing that I took away from Summer League is like he's still just a quarter of a step slower at getting to where he needs to be. I love the ferocity. I loved how he attacked the basket and really is trying to get to the free throw line a little bit more than what we saw during the last G League Ignite season. I hope that continues. How scalable his game is if he gets minutes alongside Luka Doncic right away, I'm not sure, because he's going to want to go in there and just get him up. And you know what? He should, because that's how he plays the game. But if you're Dallas, like those, again, developmental reps are not necessarily there on their NBA roster right now. So lower expectations from Hardy year one as a result.
Spins, I just want people to know where you had him on your board, because it was me and Matt doing this before, and we talked about Jaden on the pod before, but I do want to just let you were very high on Jaden, and I want to like be very clear with the people.
Number 6 on the board for me. Really, really high, because I still believe at the end of the day, what you draft for are those pillars. And Jaden Hardy has self-creation, 3-level scoring upside, good length. And those are the things that I'm really looking for to draft from a pillar, is a guy that can turn into a number 1 option offensively. I think Hardy has the potential to do it. He is farther away, which is one of the reasons why he fell to the second round. But I am willing to buy into that potential.
Well, and it's even if he's not a number 1, he could be like a Jordan Poole kind of guy.
Yeah.
Right. Like there, if you can dribble, pass, and shoot, there are ways to get you on the court and be an effective player at the end of the day. Jaden can do that.
Yeah, it's not become a number 1 option or you're out of the league, right? It's not a strikeout thing, which is why I felt more comfortable putting him higher on the board, because if he doesn't end up being that number 1 option, I still think there's a pathway to being a productive player. I really value guys who can go out there and score 25 to 30 on any given night. And I think Hardy's that guy.
Okay. New segment on the show. What did you cook this week, Adam Spinella? Because look, Matt and I, we shared movies and TV shows together, and we'll talk about that in a minute with Adam. But the thing that Adam and I share is a love of, in Adam's case, cooking, in my case, baking. Adam, what did you cook this week?
So a couple different things. As I mentioned at the top of the show, this was my last week of real summer break. So I wanted to make sure I spent a ton of time in the kitchen, because that's something I enjoy doing over the summers is cooking and putting a lot of time into meals. 2 things really stood out to me this week. One, I did like a 12 to 15 hour marinade on a pork tenderloin and some Korean barbecue sauce. Tried to mash that up with some noodles and some vegetables and a stir fry we put in there. Turned out pretty well. Would recommend Korean barbecue for anybody that hasn't had it out there. Just goes really well with pork. And then I did make a really good homemade kind of blush sauce, like a tomato sauce with some cream in there and some Parmesan cheese. Let the cherry tomatoes kind of boil down and reduce, put some tomato paste, some herbs in there, onions, garlic, all the good stuff. And then add some cream, whip it together at the very end. Put some homemade pasta. Thank you to whoever got that for us off our wedding registry, a pasta maker. And it's really good. I'm an Italian. I'm going to love pasta. Like, that's my bread and butter and what I go to. But that was one of the good meals to send myself out on before evening time becomes pretty scarce around here.
I love that you're making your own pasta. That's the key. Like, that's fantastic. That's something that Laura and I have not jumped into yet. We will at some point. So we'll get into what I did, but to do what I did this week, I had to go to the store, like a department store out here, and like buy some supplies. And one of the things I saw was a pasta maker, and it was on sale. It was like $100, like for a pasta maker. And I was like, should I do this? Like, I didn't do it, but I don't know. At some point I'm going to have to do that. Yeah. But part of it is like, I feel like if you're an Italian, and look, I am as well, like, are you cheating a little bit having the pasta maker instead of like using the rolling pin? Like, is that the...
Yeah. And I tried doing it the old fashioned way a couple times, like years ago. And it didn't stick for me. It just wasn't very good. There was one time I had company over and tried to make gnocchi, and those suckers just wouldn't float. So like, I don't want to look like an idiot anymore. We got the pasta maker. We're going to just roll with that now.
Yeah. So it was Laura and I's anniversary this week, and I did a couple of things. So I did a bucatini with like a cream sauce that had like a bit of garlic, bit of chili. Didn't make the bucatini on my own, pre-made bucatini, but made the sauce. Not quite an Alfredo, but like a creamy based sauce that was very good. Turned out great. Very pleased with it. But the real thing I did is that for our anniversary, Laura, who is the best wife, bought me a patisserie book of recipes that I can learn to bake from and improve my baking skills. It's like a book that has like a lot of skill-based stuff, and then it has like recipes. I started with like the very basic, just lemon meringue pie. I'm going to go through and make all of the recipes in this book at some point, but started with the lemon meringue pie, made the pastry, made the curd. The curd was absolutely perfect. I candied some lemon peel and put it like on top of the curd. And then obviously did just like an awesome Swiss meringue on top of it. And it turned out absolutely fantastically. Yeah, it went really well. Just a perfect gift. Just I couldn't be more thankful for my wife for doing that.
Well, happy anniversary. And as you say that, I think I just booked my flight out to Australia to have some of that next time you're making it. Because that's, oh my God, it's everything that I love right there.
Yeah. I think the next one it's like this apple tart on croissant dough kind of thing that I'm going to do. I'm excited. But yeah, and then movies. I watched a few movies this week with Laura. We watched What Josiah Saw, which is this movie by a guy named Vincent Grayshaw, which was the bleakest movie I've ever bleakest movie I've seen in like 2 or 3 years, probably, maybe not ever, but it was really good. It was incredibly well made. Like the way it was shot, the way the images were framed. Like there's this sequence where it's from one of the characters' perspectives and he's watching like a hallucination through like a drug hallucination through a doorway, and you're watching people like come through and pass the doorway. It's really impressively made. And then I watched a movie called Moloch, which is like folk horror, like in that genre. It's like a Dutch movie that's in English. What else did I see? I think we talked about Nope last week. I saw Nope in theaters. What else did we see?
I just want to know where you find these movies. Like that's the obscure Dylan Jones of Weber State find of a movie, a Dutch film shot in America.
Yeah.
Wow.
Those two were on Shudder. Those weren't actually that hard to find. Laura and I go through Shudder pretty regularly and we find those. I saw Not Okay, which is this movie with Zoe Deutsch where she like, how do I explain this? She like fakes being at a terrorist attack for social media clout. It's like one of the most uncomfortable movies that you will watch, and she's amazing in it. I don't even know if I'd recommend it, but I finally watched Hustle as well.
Yeah. Well,
which was nice.
Uncomfortable movies is the last thing I'll say here before we end the movie topic. The most uncomfortable movie watching experience I ever had was being 15 years old, going to see Knocked Up in theaters with my high school girlfriend and her mother. So there have been some really, really bad moments in terms of uncomfortable movie watching experiences. I don't think I will ever be able to top that one though. Yeah.
What was your thought process going into that? It's right in the title, Adam.
Yeah. Nope. No good thing could come of this is really basically what it comes down to. Yeah.
It's in the title. You can't even like come up with the excuse of like, oh, I didn't know what this was going to be.
No, I think this ended up being one of those movies where, she said she wanted to see it and mom was like, well, if you're going to see it, you have to see it with me. And then I'm kind of there. So it was a time.
Well, the good news is I finally just killed the mosquito/fly that was buzzing around here. So this is a good place to end the show on. 2 hours, almost on the dot. Spins, tell the people where they can find your work.
Follow me on Twitter at @theboxin1_ or over on my Substack page, theboxin1.substack.com. It's Sunday night here as we're recording. Monday, actually releasing a piece pretty proud of that has to do with the relationship between positive free throw shooting and growth to become a 3-point shooter in the NBA. So be on the lookout for that one. But otherwise, just follow the Twitter. And Sam, always good to see you.
It's always good to see you too. Go to Adam's YouTube channel, by the way. Yeah. Adam Spinella over on YouTube. One of the best NBA draft YouTube channels that you will find. Like I said, I wrote about Talen Horton-Tucker. I'm assuming there's going to be like a little bit of NBA action this week. Doesn't look like I don't know. Maybe I'm assuming that because Kevin Durant has said that he's staying in Brooklyn and the dams have broke a little bit with the Lakers Pat Bev trade, I'm assuming that there's going to be a little bit of action this week. And if there is, I will write about it. If not, I may not write about it, and I will continue to start work on the 2023 NBA draft guide. That's where I'm at in my life at this point. I'm already starting the 2023 NBA draft guide. But that's what's going on. We'll be back later this week with something fun on the podcast. And until next time,